Fanfic Corner, presented by Jennifer. The girl. Okay, now before I start reading, I just like to say if you're hearing music and talk in the background, I apologize. That's my niece playing on our electric piano. The Bad Batch found themselves back on Kamino for what seemed like was going to be the final and last time they were ever going to be there. They had gone back to rescue Hunter from being captured by Crosshair and the Empire. Now they were standing in the battle simulation room with Crosshair and his Imperial squad. "We're running out of time, Commander," one of Crosshair's new squad called out. "Hold your position," Crosshair called back. "So, this was your grand plan." Hunter caught Crosshair's attention, his hands still bound by the binders. "Bring us here and kill us. If I wanted you dead, you would be. Crosshair looked coldly into Hunter's eyes. "Not that it wouldn't be justified." He shrugged and rolled his eyes. "You betrayed everything we stood for. And for what? The Republic?" Hunter looked desperately at Crosshair. "We're loyal to each other, not some empire." Crosshair motioned his hand back and forth between the two of them. Hunter motioned his hand back and forth between the two of them, his hands still bound together. Hunter tried his best to convince Crosshair that they still shared a connection with him, that their bond was greater than some empire. But nothing seemed to sway his mind. He knew it must be his inhibitor chip. "You weren't loyal to me." Hunter was shocked by the statement Crosshair had made. He could practically feel the bitterness behind his words. "I was one of you. You may have forgotten, but I haven't. And it's why I'm going to give you what you never gave me. A chance." Everyone turned their heads facing Crosshair after hearing this, even his Imperial squad. If anything, Hunter was shocked once more at what Crosshair was saying. Feeling betrayed was a commonly shared feeling between both of them. The fact that Crosshair still thought of them as brothers gave Hunter the tiniest bit of hope that maybe the old Crosshair was still in there somewhere. Hunter looked at Crosshair with an expression of confusion and surprise, as his brother stepped closer to him. "Stop pretending to be something you're not, Hunter." Hunter's facial expressions hardened. "We're not like the Regs. We never have been. We're superior. The Empire can't protect the galaxy without strength. This is what we were made for. Think of all we could do together." Crosshair took Hunter's blade and cut the binders in half. Hunter knew that they were superior to the Regs, but he never looked at it in that way as to kind of humble himself. but also the fact that none of the regs looked at them as superiors, but as lower than them. But what Crosshair was suggesting, he wanted no part in. It was corrupting to Hunter and his squad's ideals. Hunter wanted what was best for his squad, and that meant sticking to what they were doing now and not joining the Empire. We were brothers once. Crosshair pushed Hunter towards his brothers. We can be again. Tech elbowed Wrecker, having noticed something. It was small circle-shaped mirrors that Crosshair had placed around the training room. Hunter hadn't noticed this yet, as he was still engaged in eye contact with Crosshair. Why should we trust you? Hunter said as Crosshair pointed his blaster at him. Stand down, Crosshair calls to his new squad. Negative, Commander. They all pointed their blasters at the batch. Crosshair's blaster was steadily pointed at Hunter, but then he moved it quickly to the right and fired at the tiny mirror and set off a chain reaction, killing all of the Imperial squad. Does that answer your question? Crosshair finished. Hunter backed up closer to his brothers as Crosshair pressed forward with the blaster. You were all meant for more than drifting through the galaxy. It's time to stop running. Join the Empire. You will have purpose again. You really don't get who we are, do you? Hunter was completely opposed to the idea on so many levels. Crosshair really didn't get the hint. Don't make the same mistake twice. Don't become my enemy, Crosshair said. Crosshair, we never were. Trying to get his point across. All of a sudden, the facility started to shake and the flooding alarms went off and everyone was distracted. Hunter took this as his chance. He tackled Crosshair to the ground and grabbed the blaster in his hand. Hunter set it to stun and stunned Crosshair. Hunter, 3 Venters are descending on the city. We need to leave now, Tech said hurriedly. Wrecker, grab Crosshair. He's coming with us. They were now running through the corridors. Wrecker had Crosshair thrown over his back. Tech and Echo were leading the way to the hangar where the ship was, and Hunter trailing behind. But as they were running past one of the cloning labs, something caught Hunter's eye. He turned back to look in the room as the rest of the batch headed to the hangar, oblivious to Hunter's absence. The lab was dark, but there was a single pod in the middle of the room that drew his attention. The slight glow of the pod illuminated the whole room. There was a small clone inside. There was a small clone still in its infancy floating in the pod. Probably the last and only clone left alive on Kamino. All other clones were either shipped out or destroyed. But Hunter didn't know why this one was so special. Hunter knew they couldn't leave one of his own behind. Not again. But he had no knowledge of how to safely extract a clone from one of the tubes. He looked down at the control panels, trying to figure out how to work it as fast as he could so their time wouldn't run out. Suddenly he heard rummaging behind him, and Hunter whipped his head around and held his blaster up. Please don't shoot! It was a droid. It had its hands held up in the air. I am AZ. I have been tasked with looking after this young clone. Hunter lowered his gun and turned back around to the control panel. The ground shook once more, taking Hunter off balance, but he quickly gained his footing back. AZ, do you know how to release the clone from the stasis chamber? Hunter tapped on the controls, trying his best to understand. I recommend keeping her in stasis. If we remove her now, it could have consequential effects, even death. Did AZ just say her? Hunter had no time to ponder this right now. He would have time to think about it if he came out of here alive. AZ, just do it, Hunter yelled at the droid. He didn't have time for the incompetence of this droid right now. The city was falling apart, and his life depended on arguing with a droid. Arguing with this droid. It goes against my protocol. I have to have the safety and well-being of my patients in consideration at all times. If you don't do it, we'll all die, including the clone, Hunter yelled at AZ, pointing at the tube. AZ looked at Hunter, then the clone in the pod. The droid saw that the grown clone he was talking to looked serious. AZ hurried along to the control panel and started the extraction process. Hunter practically hovered over the droid, watching as he typed on the control panel. He looked up at the tube and watched as the liquid in the tube slowly lowered and drained into the bottom of the tank. Hunter found a towel on the other end of the lab and picked it up. He moved back over to the tube that was now rising up. "Hunter, where are you?" Echo yelled into the comm. "We have to leave before the whole place goes underwater." Hunter grabbed the small clone gently and slowly removed the tubes that were attached to her back. He quickly wrapped her in the towel and held her close to his chest, not knowing if she was okay or not. He didn't even know if she was alive. He sprinted out of the room, grabbing AZ. The city started shaking even more now. He saw water coming through the floor. "Hunter, where are you?" came from his comm. He tried his best to reach the end of the long hallway where the hangar was, with the Bad Batch waiting for him. Tech had the ship fired up and ready to leave. Wrecker was making sure Crosshair was doing okay, and Echo was trying to reach Hunter on the comms. Echo stood on the landing platform outside the ship in the hangar, keeping watch for Hunter. They really didn't have time for this, as Kamino was quite literally going underwater and being shot at by 3 Venors. He saw Hunter burst through the hangar doors. He was pulling a droid with one hand, and his other was close to his chest, but Echo could not make out what it was. He wondered why Hunter went back for a droid and what looked like something wrapped in a towel. "Hunter, hurry!" Echo yelled as he was getting closer. The building started rocking now. Hunter tried his hardest to keep his footing once again. He pushed through and barreled into the ship. Echo followed him quickly pushing the droid out of the way. "Tech, we're all on." The ship quickly launched out of the hangar, leaving the clone's home behind for the last time. Hunter's back was against the side panel of the ship. He slid down to the floor. He was breathing heavily from all the running. He pulled the small clone away from his chest and looked down at the small life form in his hands. He looked intensely at her, trying to find some movement or any signs of life. He ran his fingers along her wrist to check for a pulse. Her small wrist was so tiny compared to his hand. Her head slightly moved, and she slowly opened her eyes. Hunter looked into her deep brown eyes. He felt something strange, like he had never felt before, almost like some sort of connection. Everything seemed to stop, even his breathing seemed to slow. Nothing was relevant now, just him and the child in this moment. She smiled at him, grabbing his finger. He felt her small grip around his finger and smiled back down at her. He noticed her hair had some of the liquid from the tube still in it. He took one end of the towel and wiped her down gently, trying his best to clean her off. She giggled as he ruffled her hair. Hunter gave a light chuckle at her happiness. As her happiness somehow flowed to him. "I must run a standard diagnosis if the child is as it is my protocol." Hunter looked up to see that AZ was hovering in front of him. He looked back down at the child once more before placing her in AZ's hands. It was late now, and the Bad Batch were now all in the cockpit. AZ had been running the tests all evening, and Crosshair was still unconscious. By this time, Hunter had told the rest of the batch that he had found a clone on Kamino. Their reactions were of shock and confusion as to why the Kaminoans would just leave one clone alive so it would just die. Now AZ hovered into the cockpit with the child in his hands. They all turned their attention to the droid. AZ handed her to Hunter. "She is in good health," AZ said. "She?" Wrecker was confused. Echo had raised his eyebrows in surprise, and Tuck looked up from his datapad. Hunter hadn't told them it was a girl. "She is CT-9900. They all looked up in shock. "She's a 99? Wrecker asked. "She is the second clone to be genetically identical to Jango Fett in DNA. Tech looked up her number in his datapad. Her name is Omega." Hunter looked down at the child. "You said she was the second of her kind. Who's the first then?" "The other clone is Alpha, other clone's name is Alpha, later referred to as Boba. Jango Fett took him as a son." "If she was so valuable, why did they just leave her to die?" Hunter didn't know how any of this was possible. "I suspect that they will no longer be needing Jango's pure DNA for the cloning process, seeing as the Empire is recruiting people to fight with them instead." Tech looked up from his datapad at Hunter. "How are we supposed to take care of the child, though?" Wrecker was just worried about what they were going to do with the child. "I have an idea," Hunter said. The Bad Batch had arrived on Saleucami a few hours ago. They went to seek advice from the only clone they knew that had children of their own. They took turns keeping watch over Crosshair to see when he would come around. Hunter had changed out of his armor and into civvy clothes that Cut had given him so they wouldn't stick out as much. It was his turn to watch over Crosshair. He sat down in the chair closest to his brother. Hunter still couldn't grasp his mind around why Crosshair would just leave them for some imperialistic rule. Wasn't brotherhood everything? Didn't they mean something to him? He sat back in his chair and sighed. He looked over to see that AZ had Omega with him. AZ was preparing to feed her. "AZ, bring her here. I'll feed her," Hunter said. AZ handed him the child, and he held her close, cradling her in his arms. He took the bottle and leaned the chair back a little to get in a better position. He started feeding Omega, and he couldn't help but smile at her. Hunter felt a bond to her like no other. It wasn't like his bond to his brothers, but something entirely different. But Hunter was excited for the journey that awaited him. Crosshair woke up to a splitting headache. He slowly opened his eyes and soon realized that he was on the Marauder. He turned over to see Hunter sitting across from him and holding a baby for some reason. Crosshair sat up on the bunk and rubbed his head. He let out a low grunt from the pain of his headache. "What am I doing here?" Crosshair asked, looking at the ground. "We saved you from Kamino," Hunter said, still feeding Omega. "Saved?" Crosshair raised an eyebrow and looked up at Hunter. "From what I remember, you stunned me." After we confronted you, the Empire sent down the Venner-class ships to shoot down Kamino, Hunter said, taking his eyes off of Omega for the first time. He saw that Crosshair's eyes widened a little in shock, but other than that, his blank expression didn't change much. They left you for dead, Hunter said. These words hit Crosshair pretty hard. It was fitting Hunter would say something like that after his brothers did the same. It wouldn't be the first time. Crosshair looked back down at the floor. Hunter got up from his chair with Omega and set the empty bottle aside. He sat down next to Crosshair on the bunk. Hunter knew Crosshair was mad and felt betrayed by their actions. And maybe stunning him wasn't the best way to go about, but they had good intentions behind it. What's with the kid? Crosshair's gaze turned towards Omega. This, Hunter held Omega out for Crosshair to take, is Omega. Crosshair took the child, not really having much of a choice. He took a closer look at her and noticed that she looked familiar, like he had almost seen her before. She's a clone, like us. I found her on Kamino before we left. I know, Crosshair said lowly. Crosshair had stumbled across the lab that she was in one day. He was surprised to see that he came across her because she was the first of their kind. He handed Omega back to Hunter, and everything went silent. Crosshair, both our actions weren't justified, but we are still brothers. Hunter held Omega in one arm and placed his other on Crosshair's shoulder. He felt Crosshair's tension a little from his touch. We need you, Hunter said, standing up, but it's your choice to stay. Omega had fallen asleep. Hunter walked away from Crosshair to go lay Omega down. Crosshair was left alone to think about his choice.